And welcome back to the Ishan S Show, this special edition of the Ishan S Show. You might not be able to tell, but I am not right now in my studio because I'm on vacation right now. And but I had my microphones and everything packed because we have an emergency episode that we are producing right now. So if you haven't heard yet, at 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time, President Biden made a very surprise announcement via social media when he posted a letter on Instagram saying that he would be dropping out of the presidential election. That is huge, huge, and I cannot emphasize just how cataclysmic and seismic this is in this general election, because this is the first time since 1968 that a sitting president has suspended their campaign for re-election. Back then, 1968, it was President Lyndon Johnson who dropped out because of Vietnam 100 days before the Democratic National Convention. This time around, it's President Biden who is dropping out because of questions about his age 100 days before the general election. Safe to say, this is an incredibly chaotic story that we've been covering here on the IshanSshow.com, not necessarily through the podcast because, I was trying to do the season 4 rollout. We were doing the RNC coverage. So I haven't been focusing that much of the story on this story on this podcast, but we have been covering it. And so, if you ask me if I'm surprised by the story by President Biden dropping out, the substance I'm not, but the way that this has been done, I think that's an even bigger headline of how no one knew what was going on, what happened, how things go forward. It was like we knew what this was coming. Did we know that it would happen on a Sunday afternoon? Not really. And do we still have any idea of what actually goes on from here? We also don't know that. And I'm going to go talk about all of that in just a second, but I want to read to you President Biden's letter to the nation explaining that he is dropping out of the election. So I'm going to read, and it goes as follows, quote, "My fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable health care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We've protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to all those who have worked hard to see me reelected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work, and let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me. I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America." So, huge announcement, something we didn't really anticipate happening. That's crazy. How did we get to this point? This is a surprising announcement because we did not actually think that it would be happening today. I know there were these rumblings on X, Twitter, whatever, of President Biden making this sort of weird announcement on Sunday, but those were not merited. They didn't have merit to them because we didn't actually have any confirmed plans or anything like that. But so nobody actually understood that this could have happened today. It really did catch everyone off guard. Even I did not have an idea of this happening. When I saw the news, I was like, oh my God, holy crap, what's going on? I saw that NBC News was reporting this. And that's because of the nature of this announcement. Because we could have expected a fair leak to have preempt this news, like, because the way the West Wing had been working under the chaos of the past 3 weeks, which we will explain in just a second, but the way that the chaos had been running, we had been learning a lot of information about this entire situation via leaks. Like, that is how we have learned so much, and honestly, it's why I think we've even made it to this point. It's because of leaks. And so I I guess you can't blame people like me for thinking that we could have gotten a leak or something like that to, tell us the news of this situation taking place, or that President Biden would be dropping out. So incredibly impressive that this was kept under wraps for this long, and that we do not, in fact, have any report that this would have been happening, and that it caught everyone in the media, everyone in politics, everyone everywhere caught off guard. So this decision came after weeks of pressure following that disastrous debate performance on June 27th. And we have, in fact, covered that race, and we talked about the debate and all the crazy stuff that's been going on. And I'm sure you have watched some clips of it, at least. And in that debate, quite frankly, if you were watching that as a Democrat, I'm sure for many Democrats watching, it was incredibly disappointing, because President Biden had gone into that debate with this sole question, this thing to prove that I am not old, that I am well positioned and capable to execute the duties of the president and to run for another 4 years. That was the question that he had to go in with. It was not a policy matter. That's why this debate was really hyped up. So what happened? Well, President Biden blew it. It was unfortunately, it was a bad debate. And so those questions of age were really ramped up, because the issue is that during that debate, President Biden would lose his train of thought. He seemed a little incoherent at times. He really was not on his A game, and he looked old. He looked like he was an 81-year-old running for president. And I mean, what are you supposed to expect, right? Like, a person at that age, they will do as best as they can. Now, the campaign, in the aftermath of the chaos, because immediately after that debate, people started talking about, taking Joe Biden off the ticket. But in the aftermath of that debate, the campaign was just like, hey, look, it was a bad night. It was a bad night, and he had a cold, because they were saying that he had just been to the G7 summit, in Europe. And they were like, oh, he has a cold, and he's a little sick. And he also had jet lag, even though he had been traveling 12 days prior, and he had been at Camp David for the week before, just prepping for this debate. So there was a lot of high stakes with this debate. And I think the assumption that the American people were just going to get on board with this notion that President Biden was he was just feeling a little under the weather, and that it really did not help, because this was a high-stakes television performance, and he had to do his best. I don't think there was much of an option to not do his best, because, quite frankly, you're not going to be able to show the American people that you are capable of communicating. And I think that's where the concern from so many Democrats came, that he could not effectively communicate his case to the American people, because constantly, this election was now going to be about his age and about his capabilities as a candidate at the age of 81 years old. So that's where it came from. And so as of this morning, so today's Sunday, July 21st, as of this morning, 40 lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, were calling on President Biden to drop out. It was a slow but then very exponential rise. So we started with 1, then we started with 2, then we started with 4, then we got to 8, then 12, then 20, and now we're at 40. And I think Friday was the day that we had the most defections, where I think 12 Democrat members of Congress, including 3 U.S. senators, all called on him to step down one by one throughout the day. And then the dam really broke when there were reports on Wednesday of this week that Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries were all meeting with Biden and talking with Biden, expressing that they did not have confidence in Biden's capacity as a candidate. The biggest, I think the most grueling one, was Nancy Pelosi. So we did know that Hakeem Jeffries was listening to Democratic lawmakers, and their concerns in the House about all this stuff. So he relayed that stuff to the president, I think last week at a private meeting in the White House. And Hakeem Jeffries, who said he supported Joe Biden, but didn't offer his endorsement necessarily, told Biden at this meeting that, my House colleagues are a little rattled and upset by your debate performance, and we want to know what's going on. Then Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, he met with Joe Biden at Rehoboth Beach, I think just a few hours before Trump was actually shot in a failed assassination attempt. And in that Rehoboth Beach meeting that Chuck Schumer had with Joe Biden, it's reported that Schumer was very firm and very direct when he told Biden that he needed to drop out of the presidential race. I think the way it was being reported is that he very frankly just said, you need to drop out. And sometime between that the Hakeem Jeffries meeting and the Chuck Schumer meeting, Nancy Pelosi had a phone call with Joe Biden, former Speaker of the House. She is a party heavyweight, and she is tough and somebody that Democrats everywhere respect. The reports that we were getting out about Nancy Pelosi is that she was talking to frontline Democrats, those in swing districts and districts where it's going to be a tight election this November. She was talking to these people, and they were telling her that they did not have confidence in Biden. Then Pelosi was also looking at polls, and she was reading the internal polling that Democrats were conducting, where it showed that Biden was not only doing poorly himself, but apparently he was also pulling down other vulnerable Democrats with him. And so Nancy Pelosi, who is a fierce defender of the House majority, she's all about the House. She's given her political career to the House. She wanted to protect the House majority at all costs, because the conclusion that came about was that even if Joe Biden was going to do really bad in this election, as long as there was a Democratic Congress, or at least a Democrat-controlled chamber of Congress, that President Trump, if he were reelected, could not fully pass that agenda of his, because there would be this check on the partisan power. So Nancy Pelosi, I think, noticed that there was polling coming out that Joe Biden would bring and drag down Democrats, vulnerable Democrats, up and down the ballot. And so that, I think, prompted the call between her and Biden, where she said that the polling shows that he can't win. This was after there was an MSNBC interview. Nancy Pelosi was on MSNBC, and she did not explicitly give Joe Biden an endorsement. And the media freaked out, and they're like, "Oh my God, she's not giving him her endorsement or whatever." And that gave a permission structure to a few Democrats to then say, hey, I'm not supporting Biden. Then there was that call report that we got. And then there was a leaked Washington Post report that said that Nancy Pelosi didn't believe Joe Biden would make it to the end of the week, his campaign. And I guess she was right, because the parameters for Joe Biden to make this announcement was that he wanted to see that somebody could beat him and that he couldn't win. The polling that we were starting to get back was actually Kamala Harris was beating Trump better than Joe Biden was faring against Trump. And I guess maybe that's part of it. But what we're learning about this decision that Joe Biden made, and it's an incredibly personal decision, and based on the letter that I read to you, it was his decision. The decision that we were getting is that Joe Biden made this decision in the last 48 hours. Sometime between Friday and right now, he made that decision, and they started writing up this letter last night. And that's how he came to this decision. I think another person I forgot to mention is former President Barack Obama, who also was not saying much about this whole charade, because, Obama is very sensitive when it comes to Joe Biden and telling him not to run for president, because Obama was the biggest reason that Joe Biden didn't run in 2016. And you could argue or not that that's the reason Donald Trump became president in 2016. I don't know if that's, fully factual, but whatever it is, Obama didn't want to tell Biden to not. But then we started getting Washington Post reports that Obama was also privately expressing concerns to aides and allies that he did not think Joe Biden could win this election. So again, that was another part of this whole piece. I think Nancy Pelosi was still the biggest blow to Joe Biden's candidacy, because, look, Pelosi is a smart, capable politician, and she knows she never is wrong. And all the leaks that we were getting, they were planned leaks. I would argue they were planned leaks. They were intentional leaks that people were posting. I don't have a doubt that this was not intentional. You don't leak that much. You don't get that much. Like these campaigns, or excuse me, these politicians, if they want to get a message out, they will let the press know in their own little way. But what we were getting from Biden is there was this huge resistance to this decision. So I said that the decision was made on Friday. There was a huge amount of resistance. And that was because he kept saying that I've made my decision. I'm running for reelection. I'm running for reelection. I'm running for reelection. And they kept emphasizing that point. But I think the question that was really coming up for a lot of Democrats is that Joe Biden didn't seem to really understand that there were these polls. There were these polls that were showing that he could not win the election, but that he was also dragging other Democrats down. And I think that's where the concern came out of. And that's where we got all of this. But whatever it is, the Joe Biden camp was expressing resentment against Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the report very specifically said, quote, seething at Nancy Pelosi. So safe to say that they were upset. And would I say that Biden was pushed out of this race? I wouldn't say that. I think that's a big step to say, but I do feel that he was pressured out. And the nature of all these types of big things in politics, he was pushed out. And that was because he kept saying that his decision was to run for election, but there were party leaders that were like, not so quite. I don't think so. And I guess that's how they got him out of this race. But in this letter that we got, he then posted another statement right after endorsing Kamala Harris to be president, his vice president. Kamala Harris is now the favorite Democratic candidate to win this election. And that's because Joe Biden offered her his full endorsement to her. And I'm not going to read the statement that Joe Biden issued, but I'll tell you what he said. He said stuff about how, as the Democratic nominee, he had to make a really big decision, and that was who was going to be his vice president. He said that Kamala Harris was his proudest decision, and that he would now give her his full endorsement. So Kamala Harris now is the Democratic standard bearer in the 2024 election. I want to read to you the statement that she said. So she said, quote, on behalf of the American people, I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as president of the United States and for his decades of service to our country. I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and to unite our nation, to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda. So that was Kamala Harris's first endorsement. Let's take a look at it. I first want to say it was a pretty classy statement. First, she thanked Joe Biden, but I think more importantly, she said that it is my intention to earn and win this nomination. She is not saying that I want to be coronated as the next Democratic nominee. That's not what she's saying. She is saying that I want to earn this nomination. And so that goes a bit into the nature of what is next. Like, what happens from here? Now that Kamala Harris is the overwhelming favorite, what does this process look like? So the way this is going to unfold is that the delegates that we have in the Democratic primary, so when we vote in a primary, we vote for delegates, and these delegates are pledged in support of a certain candidate, so they go to the convention and then they vote for that candidate to be the nominee. So in this case, the delegates, that 95% of the delegates overwhelmingly were in support of Joe Biden to be the nominee. However, Joe Biden is no longer the candidate, and he's no longer actually a candidate. He's dropping out. So the question was, what happens to these delegates? Now, according to Democratic Party rules, those delegates are free to vote for whomever they want now. They can vote for, a potted plant or something. I don't know. But the way this is going to work is those delegates are going to now vote at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago for a new candidate. Actually, sooner than that, there's a roll call vote on August 7th. There's a whole legal issue as to why they're doing it before the convention, but there will be a process for these delegates to select a new candidate now on August 7th, and then at the Democratic National Convention, formally nominated. So what does that process actually look like? Well, Kamala Harris, in her statement, said that I will earn and win this nomination, which means she is not assuming that she's going to be the candidate. Even though she has the endorsement of Joe Biden, she has the endorsement of countless members of Congress already in just an hour or so. She is saying, hey, I'm going to run and I'm going to win this nomination so that there is no question about my legitimacy. And I think that's pretty classy. I think it's showing that she's earning this nomination. There were going to be questions, I think, about whether or not she was just handed this and that others were given the opportunity. This statement shows that she is ready to give that opportunity to people. So it goes to maybe a swing state governor or a member of Congress who thinks they should be president instead of her. I don't think anyone is going to actually win because Kamala Harris is the only actual candidate for president who has made it this far, now she's a candidate for president. She's been a candidate. She's also been the vice president of the United States. No one is going to challenge the sitting vice president. And for anyone who is, I'm sorry about your political career, but you're not going to make it very far in Democratic politics. But she's going to earn and win this nomination is what she's saying. And essentially the delegates, I feel, are going to vote for her, especially since Joe Biden has said that he's endorsing Kamala Harris to be the vice president or to be the president now. She's going to, I feel, very handedly win the nomination. So as a candidate, how is she? She is a formidable candidate for president against Trump. And I think Trump is scared, quite frankly. There were leaks coming out of the Trump campaign that we were learning about their thinking throughout the whole chaos of these last 3 weeks in the Democratic Party. Because mind you, if you watched the episode that I made last week on YouTube, you would have seen that I was talking about how the Democratic Party is in shambles, but the Republican Party was united at the National Convention. That was just because Joe Biden didn't have a certain future. Now, Republicans are worried. I would think they are a little worried. They're going to tell you on the media, they're going to tell you on the news that they're not. But Kamala Harris actually is a strong candidate. With the right running mate, I would think that she could actually effectively win a few swing states. I say that because Kamala Harris is the young candidate now. The Democrats are running a young, bright candidate, and the Republicans are now running the old guy. Until this point, Joe Biden, even though he was just 3 years older than Trump, he was the old candidate. Now we have the young candidate on the Democrat side. Trump is the old guy. He's the old guy with J.D. Vance as the nominee. I think all the arguments that we were getting this long about Biden, picking Biden in this race, you're going to vote for President Biden as a vote for President Harris, it's all over. Because now she is running to be President Harris. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he will never give up his spot. Like, if we were in this situation right now in the Republican Party, I don't think there would be this much defection because they all just kind of rally up behind Donald Trump, but B, Donald Trump wouldn't give up his spot. And so that's why I think that Donald Trump is now going to have to answer these questions about age because Kamala Harris is 20 years younger than him. And they were ready. Like, they had an attack ad that they posted as soon as the news was made public. Although I think they're scared because Joe Biden privately in the campaign leaks, we were learning that they wanted Joe Biden to be the candidate. They wanted him to be the candidate so that it makes it easier for them. They thought that he was a more beatable candidate in this election. Unfortunately, he's not going to be the candidate. And I think Trump is nervous, or at least the Trump campaign is a little nervous about this. There's legal stuff coming up now. Money-wise, I think the money can effectively, from Joe Biden go to Kamala Harris because she was in the Biden-Harris campaign. And the Biden-Harris campaign has just been refiled to be the Harris for President campaign. The process, she's the overwhelming favorite with the delegates. But the legal issues, now Republicans were trying to get on top of this because maybe they can't really beat her on substance or something like that. I don't know. But they were talking about legal issues if Joe Biden was to drop out of the election, getting her name on the ballot. There was one report from a source that I got on Twitter that said Donald Trump, that Republicans are not happy about this decision and that Donald Trump may not even debate Kamala Harris because he thinks she's a illegitimate candidate. I don't know if that's true, but if that's his thinking, then they're trying to maybe set up legal stuff so that they could try to have another big lie that they had 4 years ago. Who knows? But now that Kamala Harris has the candidacy, I feel the nomination pretty much secured. The question is about running mates. So who are her running mates going to be? Well, if you follow the Ishan S Show on social media, you will know that I did post this on the ishansshow.com. We have 5 candidates that I am keeping my eye on. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, just got elected in 2022. Smart, charismatic, young guy. I think he has this really compelling candidacy and political strength that Kamala Harris could benefit from in a state like Pennsylvania. But then the argument is that maybe we should just keep him in Pennsylvania and allow him to exclusively campaign there for her. Next is Governor Andy Beshear. This is a fella I've talked about a few times. He's a 2-term governor of Kentucky. He is a blue governor in a red state. He has this demonstrated capability of winning in a Republican state. It's not even like Joe Manchin winning in West Virginia, because West Virginia at some point was a solid blue state. Kentucky has been a reliably red state, ruby red state. So that, there's this whole thing about, hey, oh my gosh, like, is Andy Beshear there were questions about Andy Beshear running for president himself, but I think he would make a really good running mate for Kamala Harris because she is more progressive. She is more on towards the left. She's more mainstream Democrat. Andy Beshear would be able to swing voters, I would think, in his policy stances and the way he's going to be covered. Next is Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. We've talked about her plenty on this show. She comes from Michigan, popular governor of that state. And I think it would make history as the first all-woman ticket. I don't know if that's something that Kamala Harris is even thinking about right now, because that is probably not even a thought that's crossing her mind. She's probably thinking about running mates. But Gretchen Whitmer, I think, is a strong candidate. We have Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly, I'm hearing, actually his camp and Kamala Harris's camp communicate a lot, and that Kamala Harris seems to really like Mark Kelly. He's also the husband of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who we all know was tragically another victim of an assassination attempt in 2011. She survived, but since then she has become an outspoken advocate for gun control. But Mark Kelly is also now the senator from Arizona, from a state electoral powerhouse in terms of the decisiveness in this election. But in addition to that, Arizona and all of that, Mark Kelly is also just someone that Kamala Harris gets along with. And then at last is Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, another term-limited governor of a purple-ish state, North Carolina. Same thing as Andy Beshear. I think Roy Cooper is able to communicate with swing voters in a way that Kamala Harris may not be able to. And I think that makes him as a strong VP candidate. And I mean, Roy Cooper's got nothing left to do in politics, I don't think, at the moment. So I feel like he would also be a pretty strong candidate. And also, he and Kamala Harris were attorneys general around the same time. So they have this previous relationship. And so the questions that we had 4 years ago, even actually if we were looking at J.D. Vance and his selection with Trump, the questions that you get about these running mate selections is, who is someone that A, can help me win electorally, but B, who is someone who can appeal to the base, and C, who is someone that you have a good relationship with. And that really matters. And I think Kamala Harris is going to value that relationship a lot when she's making this selection. Also, of course, you want to find out who is the best politically, but that relationship matters. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had a good relationship. I mean, I don't think there were many conflicts or anything like that between Biden and Harris, the way we might have seen between Trump and Pence. Like, they got along well, and I think that is part of the reason that this transition to Kamala Harris has been so incredibly smooth. Like, he announced, and within 30 minutes, we knew Kamala Harris is the nominee. Like, we have this good feeling. So anyway, that is a lot of chaotic breaking news that we are getting. This is a special edition of the Ishan S Show. We don't usually post on Sundays. I will still be off through Tuesday, but if anything else chaotic happens, you can subscribe to the political news blog on the ishansshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe on YouTube if you're listening to this on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify. There are so many ways to get the breaking news, and in a chaotic time like this, I don't know how many times I can emphasize we are living in historic, unprecedented times. So please keep yourself informed and find out ways you can listen to this show, because we are reporting, we are trying to get you the information as fast as possible. So stay tuned, keep listening. take a little time to enjoy the ever-changing and interesting world of American politics. Thank you so much. We'll see you for regular episodes soon.